All right, Acts 15:21. Do you remember this? After James finishes with his 4, then he says, the reason why we can do this is because Moses for a long time has in every city them that preach him being read in the synagogues every Sabbath day. So there's a whole lot of stuff in here in which James is satisfied with following what Moses laid out for the stranger that sojourned with Israel during the time that Moses was doing that. James is going to follow that. He's picked those out, applied them in Acts 15, and he says this is why. Because they're coming to synagogue. They're already coming to synagogue on the Sabbath. Moses is already being taught. So all they have to do is continue to do that. They're going to get this. Once again, it's not that hard. They get the 4 because they get the rest on the Sabbath day, since they are required if they are to be his people. All right, let's take a look at those prophets. I've told you what they say. You're going to need to see those. First, though, I need to prepare you for verse 7a. All right, because this is the passage that I want to address fully here. This is the KJV. It says, and upon the first day of the week, when the disciples came together to break bread. I'm sure you've seen that before. I'm sure you've read it before. I have a couple of other translations I would like to share with you. The first one is the New English Bible, and the red link underneath, well, that is a link. That is the link to the New English Bible online. I don't have a personal hard copy of the New English Bible, but I'm going to share the text here of verse 7. And of course, when this PowerPoint gets converted to a PDF, you'll be able to click on the link and pull that up. Here's the verse. On the Saturday night, this is how they translate it. On the Saturday night in our assembly, for the breaking of bread, Paul, who was to leave the next day, addressed them and went on speaking until midnight. This is how the New English Bible translates Acts 7. Now, the next Bible I want to share with you is this Bible. It's called the One New Bible. It was One New Man Bible. It was given to me by a family here in the assembly, and I was reading through it to look at what they had as a translation because it's very Hebraic roots oriented, and I thought, well, let's give them a chance. Here's what they have. At sundown, at the end of the Sabbath, with a service called Havdalah, when we gathered to break bread, Paul was speaking with them because he was planning to go on a journey the next day. I was like, wow, what a translation. So, just wanted to share that with you. There are others. I have a list, you'll see. Some of the other sources that acknowledge the underlying Greek contains the word Sabbath. Here's a list. Yeah, I know you can't read that, but you will be able to one day. Okay, let's continue. There are two possibilities on how to understand what was taking place in the time frame in Acts chapter 20, based on the story, the context before. We have a few verses before. Actually, it connects to 19 right at the end. You can see the travels beginning, what's going to take place. There's two major possibilities. The first one is, this was a Sabbath synagogue meeting in the first century, transitioning to a Havdalah service with the breaking of bread. We know they did this historically. They would have Havdalah after the synagogue meeting. Paul beginning to teach, preach, speak. There were several different possible translations for the Greek word there. To the disciples right afterwards and into the evening, knowing that he intended to depart the next day. So he didn't take over the synagogue meeting. But when that was over, which would be the reading of the Torah and the prophets, then after that was over and they're breaking bread, then he's going to start talking to them. And that's going to continue into the evening. The second possibility is Sunday morning service with the partaking of the Lord's Supper. I got this from a Christian commentary. Then Paul beginning to teach, preach, speak to the disciples, knowing that he intended to depart the next day. So in this particular scenario here, Paul's going to be speaking for about 11 hours before the guy falls out the window. Now personally, my limit is 9 hours. But anyway, then there was 6 more after that because he kept talking until sunrise. So the question is, do they gather on Shabbat or did they gather on Sunday? So I'm looking into the matter. You know where we got to start. What do the prophets say? Isaiah in 56:3 says, "Let not the foreigner," if you want to look up foreigner, the Hebrew word there, which I did, I looked up every occurrence in the scriptures. This word is frequently used when they want to refer to idol worship. You're worshiping idols like those foreigners. It really was in there a lot. Okay, so that's what this particular word is talking about. And then it said, okay, let not the foreigner that has joined himself to Yahweh, what did we see before? Speak, saying, Yahweh hath utterly separated me from his people. Which I don't even know why he'd say that, but I'm sure there's a reason. Somebody must have said it, because the text is here. But here we have joining himself. And we've got another verse coming out of this too. Let me give you Zechariah 2:11 first. And many nations shall be joined to Yahweh in that day. Remember what James said? After that, I will return, and etc. That's what James says in Acts 15. After that day, I will return, quoting the Father. That's what the Father's going to do, because he left. Now he's going to return. So he's quoting that, and so here we have it. Shall be joined to Yahweh in that day, and they will be my people. Okay? Now, I will dwell in the midst of all of them. And we saw that otherwise as well in the Jeremiah passage, and James does use the Zechariah section as well. Now, let me bring a couple other passages here that you are aware of so we can see how this all fits together. This is Isaiah chapter 2. And it shall come to pass in the last days that the mountain of Yahweh's temple shall be established in the top of the mountains, and shall be exalted before the hill, above the hills, and all the nations shall flow unto it. And many nations will go and say, Come, let us go up to the mountain of Yahweh and to the temple of the God of Jacob. They're saying this out of their free will. And he will teach us his way, and we will walk in them. Parallelism. Out of Zion shall go forth the Torah and the word of Yahweh. So these are the nations who at some point in time in the future, from the time Isaiah wrote this down, are going to come, and this is what they're going to say, and they're going to say it on their own. There's nothing here about them being forced to say that. It's not like a slave scenario. And you know this passage because the next part is about beating swords into plowshares. Isaiah 45:22. Turn to me, and you shall be saved, you that come from the ends of the earth. Who's he talking about? The nations. 56. We're back to 56. Look at this text. Also the foreigners who join themselves to Yahweh. Look what happens. This is what the prophet says is going to happen. Serve him, love the name, be his servants, keep the Sabbath, don't desecrate it, take hold of the covenant. This is the list the prophet says will take place by those who join themselves to Yahweh. So, if you're looking out at Gentiles, and you want to know which ones have joined themselves to Yahweh, and you come to the prophet, well, what did the prophet say it would look like? This is what the prophet said it would look like. That's a pretty strong statement. 56:7. Even them will I bring to my holy mountain, give them joy in my temple. If that's literal, you know what that means. Ritual purity, to go into the temple. Their burnt offerings and their sacrifices will be accepted upon my altar. Really? This sounds like restoration of the Levitical system. For my house will be called a house of prayer for just Israel. No, that's not what the prophet said. For all nations. All right, so here's the prophet summary. Foreigners will join themselves to serve, love the name, keep the Sabbath, take hold of the covenant. They'll have burnt offerings accepted, sacrifices accepted. So, if we can trust what the prophet has said as telling us what the picture will look like when foreigners attach themselves to Yahweh, here's a list. We'll just call it the list. What do the prophets say? Here's the summary statement. And the biggest thing that I wanted to highlight is they will keep the Sabbath and not desecrate it. So what does it mean to keep the Sabbath? What does it mean to observe the Sabbath? What does it mean to guard the Sabbath? What does the commandment say? Remember the Sabbath, to keep it set apart. So the question I'm going to ask, based on what the prophet says, is if I want to find out if you are a foreigner who has attached themselves to the Most High God that I serve, I want to find out your relationship to the Sabbath. I want to see if you are remembering to keep it or if you are desecrating it. That's my question. All right, let's keep on trucking. They will take hold of my covenant. I didn't want to forget that. That's why I put it as the last piece here. The Sabbath is one thing. It's a single thing. It's got some pieces attached to it. But this next part of that passage, this is it. Taking hold of the covenant. And there's a lot of stuff there. So, something to deal with. Now, you have seen what I found concerning the prophets and what they had to say about foreigners who attach themselves to Yahweh concerning the Sabbath. But this is a fair and balanced network. And so I need to ask this question: what do the prophets say about foreigners who attach themselves to Yahweh as far as observing Sunday instead of the Sabbath? What do the prophets say? Here's the answer. Nothing. I couldn't find anything. But I found one thing. I found this section in a Christian commentary where the editorial committee, where it said Sabbath about the foreigners and the Sabbath, in parentheses it said Sunday. Yeah, I was like, whoa, dude, where did you get that? Of course, I know where he got that. But anyway, notwithstanding that, I couldn't find any prophetic statements that talked about observing Sunday. The nations, the foreigners coming in, attaching themselves, couldn't find it. So, keeping the principle of Amos in mind, nothing is done without first revealing his plan to his servants, the prophets. So then the question on the table is, if Sunday is the proper day of observance, how come the prophets don't know about it? All right, the next part, this is part 2, Luke's time markers. There's a lot of things that Luke brings up in his text. Now I want you to remember, Luke's not a Hebrew. He could have been a proselyte, but the text never says he is. But he is a Gentile, and he's a doctor, and he's writing. And his audience is, I know that he's writing for this particular fellow, and we don't know, I don't know if it mentions whether or not he is a Gentile or if he is Hebraic, but I don't remember it mentioning it. So anyway, he's writing this text, and he's not writing this text while the journey's taking place, oh, Paul just got bit by a snake. No, that's not what happened. All right, this was written years later. And so what he does is he has time markers, he has Hebraic references that you have to wonder if that's going to make sense, because if we take something and try to put it back in time when it didn't exist, I'm not even going to know what you're talking about. because it doesn't have that meaning in the past time. Now today it has that meaning, but it doesn't have it then. So when Luke's writing this for people, he has to use language that fits what they will understand. So let's go through this. In Acts 1:6, so when they met together, they asked him, Lord, are you at this time going to restore the kingdom of Israel? Now here's the thing. The only way that can happen, according to the prophets, is if Israel repents and starts to walk the correct path, which is Torah observance. Once again, the prophets step up to the plate to tell us what's going on. Now, when you read this in your English translation, nobody's going to put that in the commentary there. But the fact of the matter is, there won't be restoration. So, that's what the prophets have stated. 1:12. Then they returned, this is an interesting Hebraism, they returned to Jerusalem from the hill called the Mount of Olives, a Sabbath day walk from the city. That was a tradition of the time. All right, who's going to know about that? Who's not doing it? Who's not at least aware of the culture? Chapter 2, we just did this. When the day of Pentecost comes, that is the English translation of the Greek. Really, when Shavuot comes, would be what that is. 3:1. One day Peter and John were going to the temple at the time of prayer. You realize the time of prayer was preset. People went up to the temple to pray at specific times. And here they are going up to the temple. After the Shavuot event of chapter 2, this is chapter 3, they're going up to the temple for the time of prayer. In this particular case, this particular one was 3 in the afternoon. Gamaliel, respected rabbi, this is what he says. Leave them alone, if it is from God. Okay, now think about this. The disciples were becoming well known in the community. People saw their lives daily, their interactions at the temple, Shabbat, synagogue, all the stuff's going on. People know these guys. Do you think a leading rabbi would have stood up in the council of rabbinical authority in the first century, and knowing that these guys have all stopped observing the Torah, say, if it's from God, then you shouldn't mess with these guys? Is he really going to put on God that all of these people are now not observing any of the commandments? Unlikely. Once again, you're not going to find a commentary that's going to take note of that. But I wanted to bring it to your attention. Next up, Acts 6. Brothers, choose 7 men from among you. Did you notice the last one? A convert to Judaism. I got this from a Christian commentary. The believer was not referred to as a Christian at that time. Interesting. Because remember, they believed the church began at Acts chapter 2. Acts 9. Paul went to the high priest and asked for letters to the synagogues to find the believers. If all of the believers in the way were Christians, Paul did not ask for letters to go to churches. He asked for letters to go to synagogue to find the Christians. Interesting. Acts 12, 1 through 4. This is a time marker. Herod arrests Peter. He mentions Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. In 13, here's another one of the situations. We're well past the Paul-Peter stuff now. Paul in 9, Peter in 10. This is 13. Paul and Barnabas were leaving the synagogue because they just were there. They were talking about Yeshua being Messiah. The people invited them to speak further about these things on the next Sabbath. My question is, how come they didn't ask to have them speak on those things tomorrow, which is Sunday, when we usually meet? But that's not what the text says. So, the next verse, the next Sabbath, almost the whole city gathered to hear. Wow, what an opportunity to put in Sunday congregational meetings. But it was not to be. Acts 18, more time markers. Paul had his hair cut because of a vow. We saw that vow. which may have been fulfilled in 21. I don't know. I will look into it before we get there, but I don't know at this time. In 1821, I must by all means keep the feast coming in Jerusalem. And then we come to Acts chapter 20. And I skipped 24 references just so that I could give you some examples of things. We sailed from Philippi during the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and then later on, Paul wanted to be in Jerusalem for Shavuot. So this day that this meeting's taking place in verse 7 is after Passover and before Shavuot, as you can see from the text, the way the text is laid out. All right, let's keep on. Here's the analysis. First, we have to look at the Greek itself. The first word is mia, M-I-A-T-O-N, and sabbaton, which is the way that they had the Hebrew. It just came over into the Greek that way. So this is miaton, sabbaton. Mia, technically speaking, the three words are one, not first. Proti is the word for first. Generally speaking, mia is the word for one. I'm going to show you some examples. To means of or of the, generally speaking, and sabbaton means Sabbath. It is in the plural. So just wanted to make that point. In the Greek is the word first present. Proti is not present. Is the word day present? It is not. And is the word Greek present? It is not. So first day of the week, none of those three words are present in the Greek text. And I spent a couple of days going through Christian writings and scholarship on all of the arguments that they create to explain why first day and week are not in the text, but that what it should be translated as first day of the week. And we could do several presentations on some of the things that I found, but we're not going to do it now because it's just too much. It's outside the scope of what I want to accomplish. I just want to touch on this so you can see why I'm saying what I'm saying. All right. One of the commentaries, I use 5 Christian commentaries when I want to find out what's happening in Christendom. I have my 5 favorite. Word Bible Commentary is one of them. And it's interesting, they state that it literally means one of the Sabbaths. Miaton Sabbaton means one of the Sabbaths. They actually have that in their commentary. This is the major Christian commentary. The next slide that will be here will talk about it a little bit more after I get past this. Okay, so this is the question that I have. I've seen the arguments the scholars have put forth about why it needs to be translated first day of the week. My question is, do we have any Greek in the New Testament in which first day is in there? The Greek words are actually in the text. Well, it just so happens that we do, and I'm going to show them to you. In Mark 14:12, it says the first day of unleavened bread. Actually, bread is not there. That's why I have it in italics. But here's what it is. There's the word the. There's the word for first, proti. There's the word for day, the unleavened. First day of the unleavened is what the Greek text says, and it takes bread as a connection word there. And some Bibles will show when a word is not in the text, but if they put it in there to help you understand what's being said, they'll put it in italics. The KJV does that a lot. All right, so here's an example of where first day exists. So they've got the language, they've got the tools. Another example is Matthew 26:17. It says the first day of the unleavened bread festival. And I put festival because festival is not in the text, but that's what the context is. So let me show you the Greek there. We got the first, but day's not there, so I'm going to take it out, but I put it there for now. The first day of the unleavened. And this is what the Greek actually says. The first of the unleavened. So you can see that there is a way to do it, and it has been done. So there is no argument about, well, they didn't know what words to use to actually put in there first day of the week. Boat doesn't float. Okay, Greek word for first verses 1. Freiberg. I talk about first is used when it's the first of rank and value. First of all, the foremost, the chief, the most important one of all is the first one. And that's how the word is used throughout Septuagint, New Testament. It's an adjective that modifies a noun in literal use. It modifies a noun in literal use. Both should be feminine. And there is a problem with the Greek in that area. I don't know that we'll get into it, but it is something that has to be examined. But we have a solution. The other word we want to analyze is one, which is mia, and it's a cardinal number, which means one, number one after another, one of many, that type of thing. But it's not talking about the value of the particular item that's being looked at. There's no rank or value. It's still an adjective, modifies a noun, and both should be feminine. Okay, now let's do this. I wanted to look at some passages because Christian commentaries teach me the following. You can translate mia as first. It's okay. Really? Well, let's take a look at that. Matthew 17:4. Then answered Peter and said unto Yeshua, Lord, it is good for us to be here. If thou wilt, let us make here 3 tabernacles, one for thee, and one for Moses, and one for Elias. All 3 of those words that I've highlighted there are mia. Let's translate this as first. Let us make here 3 tabernacles, first for thee, and first for Moses, and first for Elias. Really? That makes a lot of sense. Let's take a look at one more. I looked at a dozen. There's actually like 40, but I'm not going to go that extreme. 2 Corinthians 11:24, of the Jews 5 times received I 40 stripes, save one. One is mia. Of the Jews, 5 times I received 40 stripes except the first. Really? So they started at 2? I'm sorry, I'm not persuaded. Okay, so my position is the last one is the one they skipped, not the first one. So it's just a couple of examples just to show you that some of these things are approaching ridiculous. All right, what about the word week? Week is not used in the New Testament. It is used in the Septuagint, and it means a period of 7 days. I'm going to give you a quote you're probably familiar with. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem unto the Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks. So they know what the Greek word is for weeks. Okay, so far. Without question, the Greek language contained the 3 words first, day, and week. Okay, that's established. And with the exception of the Greek word for week, are used in the New Testament in a way that makes a literal reading of the text clear. So you can see there's places where it just makes the statement, and you can see which word it is, and it makes sense. And if you switch the words, it doesn't make sense. I think I found one that you could get away with. And in the first part, with Luke's propensity to use Hebraic time markers in his writings, as well as other Judaic principles that he brings out, there may be something below the surface here that we need to consider. And this is the final part. With the exception of the 8 texts in the New Testament, and I have put all 8 texts there, we're not going to examine any of them but Acts 20, verse 7. But here's the 8 where this problem occurs. We see miaton sabbaton translated the first day of the week in all of this. There's no example of sabbaton having the meaning of week in any Greek literature. Listen to that. In these 8 convenient 8 passages where sabbaton is translated as week, there is no record of that word ever being translated as week before AD 100 except for these 8 verses. And then only by Greek church fathers who were being, let's say that they were using anachronistic issues to try to read it back into the text. When I read some different commentaries that gave support on why this should be translated as week, all of them quoted things in the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th century as the reasons why this in the first century should be translated weak, but there is no evidence in anything. And let me put up the next slide. They're not in secular Greek. It's not in the Septuagint. It's not in Josephus's Greek. It's not in Philo's Greek. That's right before Yeshua. There's no other Greek literature of Jewish providence before the destruction of the Second Temple except these 8 verses. Period. It does not exist ever before the 2nd century except for these 8. Now, you know, when I find things out like that, I go, all right, come on, man. I got to have something. So, all right, what might be the reason for this? I have a suggestion. These 8 texts are not just ordinary examples of what is at stake. What is at stake here? I put this in because I wanted to read it correctly and not just say it. The Roman Catholic Church false narrative attempting to make the case for a separation of Christianity from Yeshuic Judaism. And these translations is one of the ways that they justify the separation that never took place. And we will get to that when we get down the road. But I wanted to point out that this is their position, is that this is one of the ways that we show that what happened with what Christ did caused the separation of truth and error. Error being Judaism, Yeshuic Judaism, and truth being Catholic Christianity. This is what they say. Okay, next up, idioms. As we've seen, if Luke wanted to represent Sunday literally as the first day of the week, and there's another way this is done, and it is in Septuagint, right in Leviticus 23, which I think I show you, at least it's in my head. He had the tools necessary, and here's the funny thing. He chose not to. He chose not to in chapter 24, verse 1 of his first book, volume 1, and then he chose not to in Acts 20, verse 7, which is volume 2. Both cases, he could have done it, and in both cases, he chose not to. I have to say, that is interesting at a minimum. What if this is a Hebraic time marker? Which is what I think it is. An idiom is an expression, word, or phrase whose sense means something different than what the individual words literally imply. And we've talked about this before. We've told jokes about Costa Rica and things of that nature. I'm not going to get into my jokes today, but I am going to give you a couple examples. When people speak using idioms, the meaning will not be understood by a listener who's not heard the figure of speech before. If they're from another language, and they have not heard this idiom before, this figure of speech, they're just going to take it literally. They're not going to know that it's referring to something else. And I gave a couple examples, probably not the best, but I thought they got the point across. Chip on his shoulder. Still being upset about something that happened in the past. And this is another one, adding fuel to the fire. We've heard that saying before. When something is done that makes a bad situation even worse. All right, so let's take a look at this. If we were to translate, he has a chip on his shoulder, into another language where the idiom of what it means is unknown, to make it known to the audience, it would have to be translated with words that mean in English, he's still upset over something that someone did to him in the past. Whatever word you choose to do, you've got to be able to communicate that that's what the subject's talking about, because if you just make the statement of the idiom, and they're in a different culture and different language, and they have never heard of it before, they're not going to get it. So you got to make it clear. And here's the other one. He added fuel to the fire would be translated into words having a meaning like, he just did something and made the whole situation even worse. That would be clearly understood if you had words like that in the sentence. So, if mioton sabaton, which is the Greek in both Luke 24:1, all 8, but 24:1, which Luke wrote, and Acts 20, verse 7, if it meant the first day of the week in the original Hebrew, then the translation into Greek would have to be clear using the Greek words first, day, and week. which none of them exist in the text. It's always been a question in my mind. Now, yes, I did have it. Leviticus 23:15. It states that over 7 weeks, we're to count the Omer up into Shavuot. 7 Sabbaths. Since the text says, this is the Greek Septuagint text in Leviticus 23, it has Toa Sabbaton, the morrow after the Sabbath. If this is talking about the Saturday, the weekly Sabbath, if it is, then what day is the morrow after the Sabbath? Sunday. So if Luke knows that a particular day is the week Sabbath, and he wanted to talk about Sunday, and he wanted to use something that everybody knows from the Hebrew, because the Septuagint has it right here, the morrow after the Sabbath, he's got the tool to do it, because this is how they did it. And, oh, yeah, Luke didn't do that. Got to make you wonder. What if Miaton Sabbaton meant one of the Sabbaths between Passover and Shavuot? This is my question. If you look at the 8, you will notice, and this is 1 Corinthians chapter 16:2 applies as well, because you'll see later, before feast, you see the Passover, afterwards you see Pentecost, Shavuot. So all 8 are on the timeline, the time markers that Luke likes to do in his writings. This falls in line, not for 6, not for 7, all 8. This would be true in the time marker of Judaic timeline, if that's how we were to understand it. It is one of the Sabbaths between Passover and Shavuot. Okay, weight of evidence. Without question, if Luke wanted to say first day of the week, he could have done it. One question that remains concerning this dubious translation is why there is no evidence of this usage anywhere prior to the 2nd century except in these 8 texts. That's a question for me. There is nothing. And what about the prophets? Sabbath, temple sacrifices, circumcision, and the like. What did the prophets say about what was going to be happening with nations that attached themselves to Yahweh? A close examination of Luke's Acts answers the question, when did the disciples stop observing Torah, with a resounding never? I stopped at 20. Luke's Acts has 28. We're going to get to them. And there's a whole lot more coming about the Torah and observing the Torah. We're going to bring it out. But I did stop at 20. But if you are going to take the book of Acts, and I'm going to say, show me where in the text the disciples stopped observing Torah, you can't find it. That says something to me. James, Acts 15, makes it clear that Torah is read on the Sabbath. Did you notice James did not mention that it's also read on Sunday? It's not in the text. Just curious. Evidence from the next several centuries concerned Sabbath observance at that time. We'll get to that one day. If the text said that Paul was meeting with all of the non-Jews before he left, that would be the Gentiles, then maybe that would strengthen the side of the case. But it doesn't say that. He was meeting with the brethren. And there's nothing there to isolate out that only Gentiles were meeting in that Sunday service where they were going to take the Eucharist. It's not in the text. The Christian commentaries say that they all met on Sunday and took the Eucharist. Yes, that's exactly what the Christian commentaries are saying, but it's not in the text. And this is the problem I have. According to historical records, Jews didn't have both the Sabbath and Sunday off in the 1st century. I've looked. The written Roman law authorizing Jews to not have to work on Saturday is clear from 100 BC moving forward. I've read a number of them. Now listen, Rome was not happy with the lazy Jews, but the law was in place. I have not found a single thing where they were also off on Sunday. So just how did they meet with all of the Gentiles on that Sunday service? I don't know. That's a question. The whole affair seems to make more sense if there is a Sabbath gathering on that Sabbath day, followed by Havdalah with Paul speaking into the evening, which was technically Sunday. So when the dark has come on that Sabbath day, Havdalah's over now, Paul's talking, and it transitions into Sunday. So, in fact, you could say that this meeting took place on the Sabbath and Sunday, and that would be the truest statement. But to say that it only took place on Sunday and Paul took his leave on Monday is a very weak argument with no evidence to support it. And if the meeting started on one of the Sabbaths between Passover and Shavuot, a Hebraic time marker, like what Luke is so fond of doing, then Miaton Sabbaton would be what you would write. One of the Sabbaths between Passover prior to Shavuot, as all 8 of these passages are. Isn't that like cool? All right, moving forward. Next up, Acts chapter 21. Isn't that interesting about all that stuff? And listen, I reined myself in on this presentation because there was a moment in time when I said, oh, I could make 6 presentations out of this. And then everybody would sit in the window on purpose, hoping to fall out. So I chose against that. I just wanted to give you like the tip of the iceberg of some of the things that go into looking at this text, because this is an important text to Christendom. As they say, this is the one and only unequivocally debatable text that supports Sunday meeting in the first century. Commentaries say it. So, just wanted to let you know, I'm not fully persuaded. And that is all. Thank you so much. And I will see you in Acts chapter 21.